The national identity of the Palestinians is a relatively modern thing.
I understand, but like
In
you could also
reaction to the
argue
British.
that to some extent, like the Jewish ethnic identity is similar.
This is one of the most frustrating anti-Zionist talking points. You're wrong. The national identity of the Palestinians is a relatively modern thing. And in Gaza, which has a different culture to the West Bank, there's been a huge radicalization of the problem. As an example, it's one of the
There's
most anti-Semitic places on earth. One of the
Sure.
most
I think you
anti-Semitic.
have to be careful. I'm like I understand when you say relatively recent thing, right? Probably like 1910s, 1920s with the Mufta and everything and the formation of the Palestinian Identity.
1920s,
Sure, yeah.
1920s, I'd
I
say,
understand, but like
in
you could also
reaction to the
argue
British.
that to some extent, like the Jewish ethnic identity is similar, right? That I don't know if Ashkenazis that lived in Europe would have identified along the same ethnic lines as Mizrahi or whatever from,
Yeah,
Arab
yeah,
countries.
okay. With all due respect, they did. There's usually that's how we traded. We travel around the world speaking Hebrew. We read the same books. We prayed.
First of all,
All
hold on.
those. So,
No, no, that's not true. Okay. They had to fight for Hebrew to even be the national language of
bro, this is one of the most frustrating anti-Zionist talking points. You're wrong. You're categorically wrong. Hebrew was the language of the religion. So any religious books, well, most religious books were written in Hebrew. Some were written in so for instance, a rabbi like Maimonides was the 1200s. He wrote some books in Arabic, some books in Hebrew. But Hebrew was the language of prayer. Hebrew was the language of the synagogue. Hebrew never died. It wasn't a spoken language, but it was a language we had in common.
I
So if a
understand, but
Jew spoke,
learning to do
no. So
Hebrew
if a
for bar
Jew,
mitzvah is not the same as your day-to-day
no, I'm
conversations
sorry.
with people in the
With
countries
all
you lived
due
in, right?
respect, with all due respect, you're mistaken on this. So Jews were highly literate compared to other populations. They wrote in it wasn't your experience of Judaism is basically secular Americans with a sprinkling of a Jewish identity on top of them. They've been assimilated and absorbed by American culture. Most American Jews' religion isn't Judaism; it's progressivism, which they wrap into
Sure.
Judaism.
Hold on.
So your idea that you
I'm not even thinking about Jews. I'm just saying. I'm just. Okay, you tell me. You're curious. Do
so
you think that
let me explain how.
Jews living in like Eastern Russia, like the late 19th century, these Jews would have felt like they belonged to the same culture as Jews
Absolutely,
living
and
in all across the
so
Ottoman
for instance,
Empire?
there's of course there's when Jewish travelers like Benjamin of Tudela would go to different Jewish communities. He would describe they would speak to each other in Hebrew. That would be how they'd communicate. They would see each other as brother. You would intermarry with these people. There was no issue of an Ashkenazi Jew in Poland if they wanted to, if they were from an affluent trading family, whatever, marrying a Jewish woman from a Syrian family. You're so for instance, I pray in a synagogue. I used to when I lived in the UK of Jews from Yemen, Adani Jews,
So you're
and
saying that
Aden
they're
was a trader. Just hear me out. Aden was a
sure.
trading port, and so if
Mhm.
you speak to the people who live there, they all have mixed ancestry. They'll say my great grandfather was Ashkenazi, my great great grandfather was Yemeni, my other one was Iraqi, and so your portrayal of Jews as only recently having a central identity is absolutely absurd. The thing you're describing is Westerners pushing your constructs, your categorization onto our religion. We see ourselves as Am Yisrael, Bnei Israel, the children
Okay,
of
my
Israel, the
understanding was in
people
the
of Israel.
50s and 60s that there had to be a huge push in Israel to integrate all of the Arab Israelis or all of the Arabs that had basically fled to Israel post, post
They
the war of
first they didn't call
67 post.
themselves Arabs. They're Jews.
Sure,
They're not
I
Arabs.
understand
They're
they might have
completely
called
different.
themselves differently, but there was a vastly different culture from the Western European Jews that initially were kind of like the founding stock of Israel
So the
versus all
founding
of the
stock of
Jews from the
Israel were socialist, atheist, quite detached from their Jewish identity in many instances. The Jews from the Middle East and North Africa were much more rooted in their religious traditions, much more religious in a traditional Jewish identity. And
Sure, that's fine, but they
clash
didn't
you're
have a country to
describing,
go to
the
until
clash,
the secular Jews were
the,
the ones that
that's
forged the
fine. I'm
country.
I'm not against the secular Jews. I'm
Sure.
saying you can't measure what Jewish identity by assimilated Jews. So they were socialists, they were anarchists, they were anything but religious Jews, and a traditional religious Jews.
Sure. I,
So I'm
I
talking about Jews historically. A Jew from Yemen saw himself as saw himself in the same way as belonging to the same people as a Jew from Poland. We have letters of correspondence. They'd write, for instance, you'd write letters Shailot and Teshuvot, questions and answers to rabbis. The rabbis of Babylon would receive letters from Jews around the world. The rabbis of Jerusalem would receive letters from rabbis around the world, and they would answer the religious questions because they were one people. We were one people. Sorry,
Okay,
this is a
you know what? I'll
massive
take
tangent,
your
but you're wrong on it.
sure.
But that's
Okay,
fine.
I'll take your word for it for now. Maybe I'll do some more reading on this. My understanding is there's a
Happy to come back
um
and debate you on this anytime once you've done that reading.
yeah,
It's
sure.
one of
If
the
you yeah,
frustrations
sure.
where people.
That's fine. It can be frustrating for you. Okay, I'm glad. I'm glad to make you a little frustrated. You're not deleting the Palestinian identity now, regardless of how much of a construct you think it is from the 20s, 30s onwards. Like that's not going anywhere, right? That's
I've used the Palestinian identity. I've used that term repeatedly to describe them. They today describe themselves as Palestinian,
sure.
but Palestinian as an identity is a reaction to Zionism,
That's fine, but
and most
that's
and
not going to
most
get you any
Palestinians
further in.
define.
That's not going to get you
So,
any further in getting rid of it or in trying
what
to
is
like.
Palestine? What is Palestine? Describe it.
And yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, I need more context to describe that. What do you mean?
Okay. So you're using the term Palestinian based on, I assume, Palestine. Yeah.
No, I'm using it based on a collection of people that right now, for whatever reason, valid or invalid, all seem to say
Okay.
they
So when
share
they say
us.
free Palestine, what do they mean?
I mean, it depends on who you talk to. Some people think that it means freeing the whole Levant of all Jewish people and sending them back to Europe. Other people, I mean, it really depends.
But
What do you,
is it speaking about a geographical territory?
when they say from the river to the sea or from the free
From
Palestine?
when they say Palestine, free Palestine, from the river to the sea, any of
I
these,
think
it's referencing
I
a
think they're
place,
speaking to
Palestine.
yeah, they're referring to a particular place, right? Yeah. Probably
Okay.
like the
And
British like mandatory Palestine area and maybe a little bit further north, depending on who you talk
yeah,
to or
so
whatever.
what Western British mandatory Palestine, Eastern British mandatory Palestine being Jordan. So they're talking about Western British mandatory Palestine, which they call Palestine. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And what's in that territory today? Israel.
A bunch of people.
And when
Yeah.
you see any of them, have you ever, straight question, honest answer, have you ever seen any Palestinian organization represent their country, Palestine, when they're calling themselves the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign? Have you ever seen them represent that territory as anything other than Western British mandatory Palestine?
Generally, no.
I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen anyone represented as Gaza and the West Bank, and that's the issue. So my issue is not with people calling themselves Palestinian. My issue is that as long as that identity exists, and as long as the Palestinians are asking for a Palestinian state in place of a Jewish state, I think we have perpetual war. So if you were to grant a two-state solution, you would just be at the 2005 disengagement again. Radical Islam would still be here. We would just be another Yazidi. We would be another population facing onslaught from extremist forces, as long as the identity exists.
Like, I'm not going to fight you on these micro issues. Again, if you heard my content, I'm going to
I
agree
mean, I
with you
don't
on
think
most
that's
of these micro
micro, but
issues.
okay.
Well, no, when I say micro issues, I mean like individually in a lot of these things. Yeah, I'm not going to say like some people pretend that the Palestinian identity existed for, you know, back in like 500 plus years or whatever. Obviously, I don't believe in any of that. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, like you can be right on all these small issues, but all these are being used to stave off like any kind of real solution to the problem. Like you're not going to be able to talk your way into like we can just debate them into the Emirati solution. That's never happening.